tail end of Milan Fashion Week to discuss the Dolce & Gabbana show as it happens. And first of all, let's hear from our panel who are going to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Mimma Viglezio and I'm a consultant.
Hello, I'm Gary Card and I'm a set designer and illustrator.
Hi, I'm Butchart. I'm a fashion historian and a lecturer at London College of Fashion. I also work as half of a DJ duo called The Broken Hearts.
Amber, have you been looking at any of the shows that have happened in London, New York and Milan, and have you seen any trends with the music? I know that at the beginning of the season there was this big homage to David Bowie in a lot of the shows. Have you heard any of the soundtracks or?
Yeah, I heard some of the soundtracks in London. I guess the David Bowie thing really makes sense because of what's about to happen at the V&A.
Yeah.
It's like Bowie mania, global Bowie mania going on at the moment, which is kind of exciting. I mean, show music for the shows tends to, I think there's, especially in London, there's a really big synergy between fashion, like style and music. So I think the music is always a huge consideration, especially in London. And I know a lot of designers work quite closely with the people that do the music. I mean, you have obviously like relationships like Gareth Pugh and Matthew Stone, for example. That are quite sort of central to the whole idea of the brand.
Well, we were actually talking yesterday about this issue of when you live stream a show, there is an issue with being allowed to play certain music, the rights. And that's one thing that obviously Gareth and Matthew has always composed the music, except for one finale that I remember where he played the closed show theme tune, which was lots of fun. But you know, you've worked with Marc Jacobs, you've worked with quite a few brands. What is the process when you do collaborate? Do they actually want to know what you're going to play? Do you have to send lists, or are there references they give you?
Well, we haven't done specific show music. I think that would be a very tightly controlled, kind of very heavily curated thing to do. But we have done a lot of sort of product launches. We did the Yayoi Kusama Louis Vuitton campaign last year throughout quite a few cities. But I mean, for something like that, that's a real fusion of fashion and art, it's really quite exciting to be involved with because there's a certain freedom involved. And we did get certain specifications, like they wanted to focus on Yayoi's time in New York in the 70s, so they wanted that to be reflected in the music for the launch, especially the launch in New York.
And did you have to research that?
Yeah, we researched it a bit. We tend to play stuff from all eras, sort of from the 1920s through to today, so it's nearly 100 years worth now of music that we've kind of got. So we had a few bits and pieces already and we researched into it, and you can kind of find certain synergies between stuff that you find and stuff that's going on now, or even stuff that went before. So it's a really fun sort of journey that you can go on. And it's, when you do those kind of launches, it's about creating an atmosphere in the same way that it would be for doing show music, I think. So you're kind of creating an atmosphere to add to the brand experience in a way, and that's quite good fun and quite an exciting challenge.
I think with shows you have different moods, so there might be a different story within the same show where they might want a different type of music, so there's a little bit of a more precise timing. And then on the other side of the coin, Gary, you are involved in a lot of prop design and set designs, and you recently did Roxanda Ilincic's show at London Fashion Week. Again, is it a similar process where you get reference points from the designer?
Yeah, we work very closely with Roxanda. But I think our approach was a lot more impulsive with it. I mean, we had so little time to actually get it done that we had to react really fast. And so a lot of the ideas were about doing something that's very immediate. And yeah, we got quite a raw reaction from it. It's really good.
Is that typical of the sort of projects that you really want to do in London, where, I mean, I experienced this, the sort of jobs that come in, that are the jobs that you really want to do, they're very short notice, it's like, oh goodness me, and there's often not a lot of money involved, but you really want to do it and you hit the ground running, and in a way that lack of consideration makes it much more immediate and much more pure in a way.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there are awful lot of jobs like that where you just say, okay, it's going to kill me. But I think this, if we can pull it off, this will be amazing.
So it's like a little excitement of risk.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Particularly with the Roxanda show, that was risky.
Scary.
Yeah, really scary. Towards the end, you know, we were right to the end, and we did a wonderful job. I was delighted with it. So excited about, you know, and yeah, a lot of the results were almost, dare I say it, kind of unexpected. And then it all came together, it all made perfect sense.
And on the other side of the coin, these shows that we see in Milan are very glossy and big budget.
The other side of
a kind of
the
old
spectrum.
school glamour.
Yeah.
I think Nick was laughing at me the other day when we were covering the Fendi show, and I was getting terribly excited about the Fendi door that the models had to come through. This incredible set design, which that logo that Karl Lagerfeld designed of the Fendi was used as a kind of constructivist backdrop to the runway, and it just forms such an impact. So you can't underestimate that mood that this set creates. I know that Kim Jones at Louis Vuitton, they start considering their set so early, the same time as the clothing, to produce that.
So important. It's interesting actually, because one of the things that I want to do as a set designer, I want to make the most vivid and the most extreme thing, but you've also got to be mindful of the collection. And one of the things, again, working with Roxanda, is we had to be very careful that my set didn't overshadow or drown or detract in any way from the collection. So that I want to do the big F, the big Fendi. But you've got to be very, very careful.
Karl said to the press it stood for Fendi, Fur and Fun.
Well,
so it wasn't only the double, there were three actually, and I read it in the press, I didn't guess it. He said Fendi, Fur and Fun.
Mimma, in your experience, have you had to commission people like Gary and Amber to be involved in shows? And how do you decide who you want to pick? I mean, what's the...
Well, I never really commissioned people to be involved in the shows, because that's more the decision of the designer. But there are two kinds of brands or events. Some brands like Dolce Gabbana are obsessed with their roots, so there will always be a Sicilian or Italian heritage theme to anything they do. So it's not really the collection, it's the brand that then it's reflected into the collection and all the choices around. Some other designers or brand, they have a DNA and they have a style, however they choose the music and the set design and the whole holistic experience you go home with according to that collection, because as you know, collections have themes, you know, they get inspirations and stuff. And if you look at, for instance, at Gucci, it's quite consistent with the brand, however, the music, the set, the whatever is around is always linked to that collection and the inspiration behind the clothes. Did that make sense?
It does, and I think that some could say that that's when it becomes a little too literal, because you're actually trying to keep within the constraints of a collection. So you're taking the references and you're just sticking to that, and in a way...
You could do it in a subtle way. I mean,
in a way it's nice when it goes wrong a bit.
Well, I'm with you when it's... I don't like when it's didascalic in anything, in events, in whatever you do. I don't like when it's so pushed that you want to make sure that, did you understand that's what I'm trying to do? No. However, you can have references that are more subtle and more clever, and you can see that in movies, in books, in whatever, you know.
Well, I think that the Dolce & Gabbana is a very interesting period because this summer's collection was completely what you're saying with the Sicilian. It was a complete homage. Some would say it was a little too veering towards the souvenir scarf, these kind of fantasy images of when one would go on holiday. And the sort of fantasy that you enter when you go into a holiday, the kind of bag that you would use on holiday that you might not bring home with you. And then in complete contrast, the winter collection for 2012, for me, that was complete Dolce & Gabbana at its best, using the brocades, the kind of religious connotations, the purity of the lace, yet it's completely see-through, the corsetry, all those elements that have made Dolce & Gabbana.
And that's exactly the difference between too literal and subtle, because that too was very Sicilian, very linked to their heritage. And then if you saw the campaign that came after, it was the first one with many Italian, quite famous people in Italy. So, I mean, it was still the Dolce & Gabbana obsession with their roots, but more subtle.
I love the too literal approach. I know it's not
me
necessarily very sophisticated.
Are you talking about the winter or the spring summer?
The summer. I love the sort of kitschy, campy element to it that was very souvenir-y. that really appealed to me, and that you could so literally see, you know, from the sort of the horse-drawn carts, you know, the wheels and all the ceramics were really from Sicily, were referenced in the collection. The puppet theatre.
Now let's just move on before the show starts, actually, to this controversial area that we were talking about when we got here today. Do you want to mention that about the puppetry and all those accessories? Because there was a bit of debate about that.
Yeah, well, there was. I mean, there was huge controversy after that summer show as to whether the iconography they were using was racist or not. I mean, personally, I don't think it was intentionally racist. They used, it was referencing ceramic statues from a period in Sicilian history when it was conquered by North Africans. And that's where the imagery came from. However, I do think that you need to show a certain sensitivity when you're showing on a global stage. And I do think that using that kind of imagery, even if your reference point comes from a good place, isn't necessarily a good idea when it can be misinterpreted so heavily from other people's kind of reference points and, you know, references from colonialism, from slavery. So I think that it was problematic in that respect. Had it been me, I probably wouldn't have used that part of the imagery. But
I would like to say something here, because what you say makes perfect sense, and you're right, you know, you have to be careful on how you can touch some sensibilities. However, knowing a little bit more in the Italian culture, I can say that it's so spontaneous in the Italian culture to reference to the history, to what happened, that there's no offense whatsoever. I'm not saying it's right, but I guess they were like, what are they talking about? There is this politically correctness that comes more from an Anglo-Saxon world, which has more to be sorry about.
Yeah, I mean, that's where
and it doesn't exist in the European
that's
culture.
true.
That's why I say it
do.
makes perfect sense, and you have to. But I can see where it comes from.
Yeah, and
it doesn't mean it's right, but I can see where it comes from.
No, totally. And I've read somewhere that there was no criticism of it in the Italian press. It wasn't mentioned at all. It just wasn't.
They didn't understand what was
going on.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it is something that very much comes from the Anglo-Saxon American history. I mean, you know, it's our problematic history, but it's that's kind of brought to the fore in that kind of imagery that then becomes problematic.
It's funny you should mention that, because you know, where my mother lives in the Yorkshire Dales, you know, a beautiful little village, in the local post office they'll have a few little toys, and there'll be a golly, you know, doll, and I'm so offended by that. But to my mum, who actually has worked in very politically correct and knows about all these things and should know better, as it were, she says, oh no, you know, we all grew up with it, and just writes it off. But I am very offended by that.
Exactly. I had a very similar situation with my mum recently. We went to my hometown in Bournemouth, and went into a little souvenir shop, and there were gollies there, and I was like, I can't believe they're still selling these. I can't believe it. And we had a big debate between me, my mother, and the shop owner about whether or not it was okay. And I said, you can't sell this anymore. They're racist, and I can't believe why you can't see. And it's like, and exactly the same, like your mum's point of view. My mum was saying, absolutely, well, this is something from my childhood that I adore, and why are you trying to take it away from me? Because it came from a really bad place.
I think with the internet now and the global distribution of the clothing, you know, the outreach, Dolce & Gabbana covers all the commercial markets. I mean, it's just incredible. You are going to offend somebody anyway, even when you least expect it. Even slogans that are in the ad campaigns.
You're probably too young to remember, but when they did that campaign in Sicily with Linda Evangelista and the older ladies dressed in black.
Was that the gang
No,
rape?
when she was sitting in front of 5 or 6 black dressed ladies, like typical Sicilian widows, and it was quite beautiful, and it was, for them, it was like where they come from, one of them. And then there was this outrage because the ladies were not paid, because it was just, they were like props, you know, they were not paid, they were not models, they were not actors.
Oh, right. You hear about that a lot.
That's really 20 years ago. And
was that Stephen
but again,
Meisel?
you know,
was that Stephen Meisel?
Could have been, yes.
Because he was the one who did the campaigns in the early 90s, and actually I had a look at your website. What's your website called?
theatreoffashion.co.uk.
Say again?
Theatre of Fashion.
Theatre of Fashion.
Because I had a quick look at your website yesterday, and what I found really interesting was that you'd written a piece about Bieber, and there was, I think it was a Bieber ad, and it was like an interior, and there was lots of leopard in it, and I was thinking, goodness, that is so similar to Stephen Meisel doing a Dolce & Gabbana campaign. And again, it was almost like you don't associate leopard print with Biba. Would you?
I think you would. I think it's integral, isn't it? It's all the
or the interiors.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It was Barbara Hulanicki was so influenced by that sort of 1920s, 30s ultra glam Hollywood kind of aesthetic. I think that's where the leopard kind of came through.
You're a big Biba fan.
Yeah, I'm a
It took me to those Stephen Meisel campaigns, which were quite incredible at the time. Every time you went back to them, there were other layers that you hadn't seen before, and they were very lavish. And I think that Dolce & Gabbana as a brand is associated with this kind of decadence, which was very much the kind of 80s fashion designer brand. Would you agree with that, Mimma?
Yes, very much. I was distracted by an image where I could see, but it links to what you say, lace. And I was thinking lace has been now very much in trend for the past year, probably 2 seasons. They own lace because they were doing lace at that time because it's very close again to Sicily and to where they come from, and so I could see the way they do lace now. It's like a reference to their 80s and 90s, what they've been, and so yes, to get back to your question, absolutely.
Even the material lace has got every Dolce & Gabbana reference in it. There's the sheer, there's the kinky, there's the religious, there's the layering, there's Madonna, all those things.
Remember those column gowns, long dresses that they did at the time, the first one with lace and the bra, so the top was literally, that's the only time in my life I owned something Dolce & Gabbana. I could so not afford it, and I guess I paid it off my credit card for a year or two. But I have one of those bra and then the lace column, and that's probably in 87, 88.
And the bra 19. Actually, the construction was quite incredible, wasn't it? Because the bra actually fastened underneath the dress.
It was amazing.
And I think a lot of people that aren't familiar with the brand enough forget that
they were very innovative, and they were creating all of that. It was quite outrageous yet religious yet, and I think that has been probably their best time, because fashion was, there were much fewer designers, and so you could stand out, and fashion in Italy at the time was the biggest probably.
I just wanted to go on to another thing to consider with a brand like Dolce & Gabbana. As we said, there was the summer collection, this summer's collection, which was very much the kind of resort look, quite garish colours and holiday attire. And then there was the winter collection, winter 2012-13, which was very much Dolce & Gabbana as one would know and love them, what they do best. They're well into their 50s now. How, what is the way forward for a brand like Dolce & Gabbana? Because, we've got Jill Sander, who's just come back to her brand for 2 seasons now at the age of 68. And, how do you keep a brand relevant to a younger customer? Because can a young person who has probably been loving fashion but hasn't really been afford to buy fashion, or maybe is the person that's bought the bag but can't afford the clothing, but has actually started earning an income and wants to buy fashion, how can they relate to a brand like Dolce & Gabbana, do you think?
Sorry, before we go to the young people, can I say something?
Of course.
That I also said yesterday in a panel in Italy. If you think about all the Italian designers, they all well over. I mean, Domenico Dolce and Stefano Gabbana are younger than Mr. Armani, Miuccia Prada, Donatella Versace, and yet it's still very important. I mean, the only young person, and she's 40, is Frida Giannini. Maybe I'm probably forgetting someone, but even Miss Castiglione is probably over 50. So I think yes, I mean, if you're a great designer and if you are as creative as Miuccia Prada or Karl Lagerfeld, to mention someone who also showed in Italy yesterday. Yes, you are relevant because you're reinventing fashion.
Do we think that these designers, though, have got the kind of structure where they can share ideas, or because there's two of them and they very much lean on each other and they have been the essence of the brand for so long, can they really listen to outside ideas, or are they still controlling that?
Is that to me?
Well, just something to think about, really, because
I don't think that depends only on their age or their brand. It depends on their willingness to. Do I think Mr. Armani really listens to other people's ideas? No. Do I think Dolce Gabbana will do that? Maybe yes, because they're not as big and they have to survive. But I've never really worked with them or around them, so I don't know exactly what goes on behind the scenes. But they will have, and I'm sure. I mean, these people have teams of designers that are huge, and there are young people in there, and there are interns, and I'm sure they get bits and pieces of.
I think they've got quite a young aesthetic compared to a lot of the other designers that show in Milan. Actually, like with that kind of campy, kitschy element that they often have in their collections, I think that would appeal to a younger customer, maybe.
I know that they've had people like Andrew Davies style their menswear collections, and he's quite progressive and he's one of the cooler stylists in London. So they're obviously, and they've got Guido and Pat McGrath backstage. These are all the clues of having those kind of creative dream teams behind them.
But they're not that young either, so you see. No, but because I think the experience and the talent and the technicality also makes you able to create new trends and see what's going on in society. And you mentioned them, but also, as you can see, they come to London to pick creativity, which I'm not surprised about.
And Amber, do you go to a lot of shows?
I report from a few of the London shows. Yeah.
And what do you like about the theatre of the show? Do you write about the shows for your blog? For your website?
I write for a site called Fashion 156. I report on some of the shows for them. But I do like that element of theatre that you get with actually going to the shows, and I like that that's something you can get across in the catwalk reports, more so than if you're just reporting on the images from style.com or something. If you're just purely writing about the collection, you don't tend to get that three-dimensional experience that comes with actually being at the show. And I think that can be, we were talking about the set earlier, we were talking about the music, all of those elements can be so important in creating the theme for the collection and creating the sort of brand experience as well.
Isn't it wonderful though that we can now, the live streaming phenomenon has now let everybody be a part of that. So it's no longer, I remember a few years ago it was amazing to see the photos come out so quickly. And now we can see it. Yeah, exactly, you have to see it immediately. But now live streaming is completely, it lets everybody be a part of it. I think that's really, really amazing.
I think I quite enjoy the fact that the creative teams backstage are letting you in, but you're seeing a very sophisticated side of that, masters that you've always respected, and suddenly you can see them preparing for the show and the models that they're doing, and it's almost like off-camera moments which are very much being tweeted that they're sharing, and it just feels very precious that you can engage with that. But on the other side, do we think that you should really have that access before a show anyway? Shouldn't it be when that show starts, that's when it is presented to the world? Because I know that some of the shows in London, there was so much you were picking up on Twitter before the show. I kind of felt that with some of it was taking away.
Yeah, unveiling the curtain. It does take away the kind of the mystery of, like everything we do now though, isn't it? Like the sheer fact that everything that we do has a making of. And I'm behind the scenes, which I find incredibly frustrating. But I think it's inevitable. It's moved so forward in that way that everybody has to see behind the curtain.
It's interesting you should mention that, because a lot of the consultancies that I do, when the clients ask for digital material as part of the project, they want this making of behind the scenes. And I always think, sometimes you show a lot of confidence by not relying on that, and I think that you're almost like paying more homage to your project by not using that crutch.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess that's kind of Tom Ford's thing, isn't it, where he's the only person that's still keeping his shows.
I think someone else I heard had banned cameras backstage at one of the shows. I can't remember who it was, and I just think it's whoever's prerogative. Yeah. But what about this whole issue, Mimma, about the actual, shows existing anyway? Because, I still don't feel, on the eve of the Fendi show, Karl Lagerfeld released a film online that he'd done for Fendi, and the detail and the humour and the vibe of this piece of digital content gave you so much about the brand and him, and you really respect. There were lots of elements that you wouldn't normally associate with him. There were just so many incredible messages. But can you get that from a show? I mean, the lasting legacy of this very short film, I think it was Peplum People, which was released on New York Times website, was the accessories. I mean, I was engaging with accessories, something that you can't possibly do when you're just looking at these runway shows. So have you noticed that a lot of people are moving towards film?
Well, a lot of people have tried to move towards film, and they tried it especially with their men's collection, and I'm talking 3-4 years ago. But the fact that everybody goes back to the show, and the only one that don't do a show, usually they find excuses, but it's because they don't have the budget. And I do believe if you don't have enough budget, that just don't do a show, because nobody wants anymore to just see clothes going up and down.
You don't need the pressure, do you? I think that those designers that do miss a season really benefit from it mentally, don't they?
But is it about keeping up appearances as well?
I just would like to finish to answer your question. Okay. However, I think that the show is still important, because at the end of the day, all that is done to present a collection that will have to last 6 months and sell and make the money for the brand, for the company, for the shareholders. And so that's why where Karl is very smart in releasing that film before, it's to talk about himself and the brand, but then the show was to show what they're going to sell from the next day or the next hour in the showroom to the buyers. So I know I'm saying track things, but that's the reality of things. I mean, it's still a commercial exercise.
Yeah. I think also that you've picked up on a very good point, which is the buyer needs this. The buyer needs to know that their clothes were in the show. The buyer needs to know that they've got the coat that was in the show. I mean, I've caught myself doing it. There's been a coat in Comme des Garçons that I wanted, and I've actually been stood in Dover Street Market thinking, the collar's not the same as it was in the show. And I'm realising that I'm falling victim to that. But the customer does have the power, don't they?
The customer wants what they see in the show, or as a consequence in the press, on celebrities and whatever, but also the buyer, as the commercial buyer, will buy into a collection on some pieces that are edited to be sold, and some others that are edited to be showing off again, and attract people into their department stores, specialty store, whatever it is. But also, when you see the pieces styled in a certain way, and there where we have the importance of the hair, makeup, stylist, because then you buy a pair of trousers, but the way they were on the show, styled in a certain way, they make them much more appealing, and hence a presentation which is static, it's not the same thing. Or when you see those black trousers on a hanger in a store, and you have to have your own imagination on how to style them on you, it's not the same thing.
Actually, I remember when I was a buyer in the early 90s, Dolce & Gabbana were the only designers who made a point of coming in the store and checking how their clothing was displayed.
Oh, really?
But really, out of all the designers, Gaultier, out of everybody, they were the only ones that really, they didn't just give you the kind of instructions, they were there and they came and checked.
Oh, wow.
It was great. I mean, you can respect that, yes.
Well, you couldn't do that now because it's too big.
I think the show is probably about to start, but while we're waiting...
they said it was late?
Yeah, it was 15 minutes.
Oh, right, okay. But while we're waiting, let's talk about, I mean, we can't not talk about the logo, because I think that, when a brand is established and they can start the licensing agreements, that I'm sure you, Mimma, are familiar with the process of that. At what point are you still retaining your brand, and at what point are you diluting that? Because seriously, the D&G on the sunglasses, that just got completely out of control, didn't it?
Well, here too there are two things to consider. One is the over-branding and overstretching, the borders of a brand by going into toilet paper, if we want to exaggerate on that, which is not luxury, it's just branding. And one other is the license agreement that takes control away from you. And so sometimes when you buy a brand and you try to relaunch it, it has started. Do you want me to stop talking? Or?
Oh yes,
we can,
let's pick up on that afterwards, yes. Well spotted.
The Queen.
Actually, from that collection last season that you mentioned, Amber, those tapestry-like bags, Dolce & Gabbana have always done wonderful craft. And I think that those bags really were probably one of the most sought after this winter, weren't they? The more tapestry style bag that they did, they were quite wonderful. Do you remember those from the show?
Yeah, well, I think that element of craft comes from their interest in their roots, doesn't it? And the kind of heritage techniques. I mean, these look like mosaics.
Mosaics and frescoes images.
Yeah.
I mean,
we were just shown actually before we broadcast that the invitation was a mosaic image.
It's quite spectacular, and we were discussing before this panel about their not presenting couture this July.
Oh yes,
there it is. Look at that.
Because they did. And one of the reasons.
Sorry, this January. I meant they did it in July, and
that's
they
it.
But
and one of the reasons, that they folded the D&G brand was actually to focus on the main line, and obviously, you know, that has paid off big time, hasn't it?
Yeah, you can see that definitely.
Well, this is quite incredible, I must say, and it's a very big departure from the summer collection.
The sleeveless column dresses, we're seeing that in a lot of the Milan shows.
But it's much more refined than what we've seen recently with them. This is really refined. I mean, certainly not subdued and discreet, but it's refined.
Yeah, and the religious and majestic, regal elements are not as naughty as usual.
But it's amazing you saying that before about the heritage connotations and everything. It's everywhere. I had no idea it was going to be so prominent.
It's so opulent, isn't it? It's amazing.
And there's no black, which usually is very prominent in their
and
their winter shows, especially.
They were very much a brand that kind of brought back, you know, brought the idea of crosses and rosary beads as fashion.
Yes. Which again could be considered non-correct politically for very devout people, you know. It's using sacred symbols.
Well, exactly, particularly the Eastern market, which is so important.
Absolutely.
The very Sicilian cut of those little suits with the kind of nipped-in fitted jacket and then a longer midi-length skirt in tweed, very proper and correct.
Yes.
Is that the music's changed so much? It's
more
kind of
completely
surfacey.
switched.
Do you think we're going from resort to resort?
Sorry, what do you mean?
Well, in Italy, to these little resorts and references.
Well, what I see is that there's no sacred images anymore. So before the music was more solemn, is that an English word? Yeah. And now it's funnier and lighter, and it's, you know, it's a lighter fashion. It's really beautiful, I must say. And again, you know, we've seen this in Milan and a little bit in New York in the trend, you know, this 40s chic, womanly coming back in elegance, and it's their way to do it. And it's very different than the others.
The coats are really beautiful, aren't they? They're very elegant.
I'm quite impressed.
It's kind of a juxtaposition, that music, with these kind of more pared down, kind of sombre pieces that they're showing now. It's quite an interesting
It gives a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's association.
What they wanted.
Make these
so chic.
These outfits a little bit more playful, maybe.
I've never seen Dolce & Gabbana so chic. I mean, not in a long time.
And that outfit that just exited, there was no accessories on that whatsoever.
At all, But look at this.
That is classic.
And there are a lot of references to their past shows, which is something that many others have done this season.
Yeah, looking at this,
done this before
with the white. They did have a phase where they brought back the white shirt, and also we forgot to mention earlier about Madonna. You know, they they did, when she released her erotica album, the tour that coincided with that, they dressed her for that. And there was that famous multicoloured beads and stone corsetry.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can spec.
Yeah.
Going back to the mosaics, wasn't there, I can't remember if it was Prada or Miu Miu, I think it might have been Miu Miu, but a few years ago they did a collection that had really similar, not as opulent, but they used
with the embellishment?
Mosaic, not with the embellishment, just as a print.
I don't remember.
I seem to remember. I'll have to have a look.
This is really beautiful.
Yeah. I want a crown.
It does make you want a decoration, doesn't it?
I loved the gold corset that disappeared. Did you see that?
Yeah, there was like an armor.
Yeah.
And the bags are structured, and again, they're very correct, aren't they?
Back to lace.
Yeah.
There are so many references on what they've done before. I mean, it's.
But there was in the show a year ago for the winter collection. Yet this one is a lot lighter.
Yes. Yes.
It's so interesting that everything that you guys have been talking about is right
there
here in front of us. The black lace, the religious.
Yeah.
It's really, really interesting. For somebody who doesn't know about the brand at all, it's
But this is, again, like they said for Prada, but this is also a great show, I think.
And that's very impactful, the way that the white
same.
Suddenly streams the runway. That was beautifully done.
Also the black underwear underneath the white lace they've done before. And they're just giving it a modern take to it. Very nice show.
Yeah, amazing. It's beautiful.
Castanets.
Yeah.
Only a Dolce & Gabbana show.
It's verging on farcical, isn't it? It's verging on like so ridiculously.
The music is.
Yeah, but I guess it's fun. I mean, why not?
Maybe Domenico, because he's the one that's from Sicily.
Yeah.
Maybe his restraint in the clothing, he's releasing in the music.
Yeah, I love that.
Look at that.
Now, what is that? Is that that shimmery dress? Is that sequins or tassels? Do we think?
That's like a
I think we
homage
missed
to
that.
Valentino, I must say. I don't know. I can't see the fabric long enough. Many Asian models, did you notice?
I think a lot of the designers have to consider that now.
Finally, there's
for
such
that
beautiful
market.
women.
Yeah.
Look at this, spectacular. This is couture.
Wow.
This is very close to couture.
Beautiful embellishment.
It's going to be an expensive winter, this winter.
Yes, that whole recession. What recession?
Yeah, but did you notice that even though this is a winter show, they've still got the sunglasses in the show, so they're being wary of the promotion and marketing of those elements.
It makes so much difference being able to hear the music. It really gives it a different
Oh yes.
twist, doesn't
Are
it?
Music, it's really almost ridiculous, as you say.
Are you referring to when you go on the newswires and look at the... because it's funny, isn't it? Maybe that'll be the next stage when you go on Vogue.com or Style.com or whatever, you have a little button to have the show music.
Yeah. That's a really good idea.
The problem is that, you know, on SHOWstudio we have that where you want to get clues of what's going to be happening so that we can discuss that correctly, and a lot of the PRs or designers can't release it beforehand.
Right, yeah.
They don't decide till quite late, and also they're worried that you won't wait until the show. So do we think that we're going to see any of these gowns on the red carpet?
You mean tonight? Maybe not tonight, but yes. I'm convinced this is going to be very much seen.
They look very young, don't they?
I was thinking exactly that, what you were saying before, and I was imagining, I mean, if someone has the money, but I was imagining a young girl wearing this with her own take. Why not?
Yeah.
Right? I don't think it's old, but even the return of longer skirts, it doesn't mean old. It means just we've seen enough of legs and
We were talking yesterday about
that
how
was spectacular show.
really wonderful.
Yeah.
We were talking yesterday about how a young person actually is dressing more sophisticated now. The person that is normally inspired by streetwear is dressing more elegantly.
Look at this.
What
it's
beautiful finale.
But you can do that when you have many looks, many more than average. Look at that.
That's incredible.
That's quite expensive what they're doing there.
Trust you to consider that.
I can tell you that. between the samples and the models, it's incredible.
It's amazing because it's almost kind of like blood trickling down the runway.
There's something quite military about it as well, even though they're not coming down in that kind of regimented
There's a music.
way.
They always do some kind of bloomer shorts. I love that.
Circus music
about Dolce
also,
and Gabbana.
right? Is it
Yes.
a little bit circus
Yeah,
music?
yeah, it's really circusy. Yeah.
Very beautiful.
Should we give them a round of applause?
I was very impressed.
It was really quite wonderful, and I think that all the things that we were worried about how this show was going to be, it completely dispelled, and they've just produced something really quite young and fresh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Really, but that's
Are
for
these-
me,
are
that's
these-
what we were discussing about them in the past.
Are these images that we're being shown, they backstage, the hair is incredible. Because we didn't see that detail in the show, but on their website, they're showing this incredible detail, aren't they?
Wow. It's really nice being able to see such up-close details immediately after seeing the
I've noticed
collection.
during this season so far that fashion has been very expensive. I mean that whatever we've seen, it's going to be very expensive because there is a lot in fabric and constructions. And I wonder, and this is more of a question than a statement, is it because in times of crisis, I'm going to say something that will sound bad, but the rich are rich anyway, and so all the designers are directing their focus to those that will be able to still spend money, because what suffers the most usually is the mid-ground, and so nobody seems to have done anything that will be there, you know, the accessible luxury. But it's like couture. I mean, those things will cost thousands
But
of pounds.
I think that with the kind of glut of high street and the terrible quality of high street, in fact,
That's the reaction.
if you're going to spend money, you might as well buy something. The luxury market actually booms, doesn't it, in times of
So I was
recession?
and
gonna
it can't
say,
be copied.
actually,
You're right. That's a very good
do you
point.
think any of it is because, I mean, when you think about the high street copying designer styles, like there's just no way that they're going to be able to recreate that kind of
I
Absolutely.
can imagine
Do you think
an
that's
embellished
an
cardigan.
element-
That's a good point.
I can imagine an embellished cardigan in H&M, and that's going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah.
And a lot of this is digital printing as well, which is kind of is
Yeah,
very
but then it's
important.
like costume jewelry and high jewelry. I mean, I'm sorry, you see the difference.
Yeah, like it would. I just think if you try to
At least you see
replicate
the
that
difference.
kind of embellishment, it will really quickly look really
Well,
cheap, won't it, for doing it.
interestingly, a couple of years ago, there was a cardigan that was sold, be it on Net-a-Porter or Browns or one of the stores, and it was just a cardi. It was a cardigan, and it had fur on it, and it was literally thousands of pounds. And I think the press picked up on this. First of all, there was fur issues, but then it was, how can you pay that for a cardigan?
Yeah.
So I think that Dolce & Gabbana really enjoy that kind of lavish embellishment and luxury. Although they do describe themselves as a luxury fashion house.
Yeah.
But those red dresses that we saw in the finale, I mean, nothing will be below 5, 6, 7,000. I mean, they were really expensive.
Do we think that all the models that were in that show quickly switched into red, or was it the red section that came out as a finale? I couldn't work that out.
Maybe some from the beginning. I don't know.
because
I
that
think
was
there were
spectacular.
many.
I mean, they swarmed that runway at the end, didn't they?
Yeah.
That was really beautiful. Really beautiful.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah. And it's just, I love the way that they bring their heritage so succinctly in. It just, for me, it's like the clothes really kind of tell a story of their history, and I really like that. I enjoy that.
Would you wear those clothes next season if you
I
could afford them?
I would. That's probably not going to happen in a hurry, but
But
yeah,
they are
definitely, I
wearable and
would.
fresh, aren't they? And I can see the high street interpretations of that, for sure.
Definitely.
But then if you were a consumer who bought the luxury end of it, you're still going to love that, and the high street interpretation isn't even going to touch you, is it? Because you've got the real deal, and it's
There was
beautiful.
a
and you
white
can't-
lace long dress that I would want now.
One of the other things that I wanted to mention was that this season, this winter, the veil has made a big comeback. In a lot of the fashion shoots in kind of the high-end magazines, there's been wonderful veils with decoration, and actually the Dolce & Gabbana veils are the ones that have appeared in some of the better versions of these shoots. So it's really nice to see that those fashion editors are still referencing Dolce & Gabbana as having that influence, isn't it? We just had a message actually. Pete Burns unfortunately was supposed to join us today, and we just had a message that he will certainly be joining us very soon for one of the panels. It was just a shame today. It's absolutely freezing in London, and I think his front door was jammed. So I think that was a successful show and a nice show to kind of celebrate the end of Milan.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. It's fantastic for me, who again doesn't really know that much about the brand, to actually engage in something and listen to what you guys have been saying about it, and then actually see it so prominently.
Do you find, Gary, that
that we don't say nonsense?
Gary, you work with a lot of big brands like Comme des Garçons and various projects with perfume houses. Do you find that you have to study the brands or know more about them when you're given these jobs, or do they give you a kind of set brief where you don't need to go that far?
I think sometimes my blissful ignorance actually helps me an awful lot. There's a certain amount of like, I'm not intimidated so much. If I were to really know how gigantic a lot of the people I was working with were, I'd probably be a little bit more terrified. But I think my clients tend to give me a very, very stringent and clear brief. And so,
stringent?
Yeah.
Does that bother you?
And so they know exactly what I do my very best to give them exactly what they need.
Mimma, you've had a wonderful career. I know you've worked with a lot of big mega brands. What advice would you give to people watching who are maybe studying or just about to graduate and are thinking that they want their own fashion label? Don't do it.
No. I mean, I now lived in London for 8 years, and I've been blessed by this incredible creativity. It's such a different scene here, and I remember 4 or 5 years ago I was sitting with a French important editor and telling her, you guys have to come to London. London Fashion Week is the most important to understand everything else. And now London Fashion Week is very fashionable, so I was right. But at the time they were like, we don't really care, whatever. But to people who want to have their own label, first of all, I cannot stand people that have no idea about design and never trained, never studied, and they think they're designers just because they like to dress. And that's something that ruined the fashion industry, and there are too many brands. There is too much mediocrity out there, and I think if the big names, they do shows like this where they show their big muscles in terms of money, because you need money to produce a collection like that, it's because they want some editing. They want the young talent around them, and we have some in London and we have some in the world, but they don't want that massive amount of people that just think they can design and they can't. So my advice is train, study, be in the shadow of those big names like the big names of today have done before them. You learn, you have access to fabric research, and you need to know what's possible, what's doable out there to then design a collection which is worth showing, and not just a pair of jeans and a t-shirt that we don't need.
I think people forget as well that when you do get on that privileged ladder as a designer to work for a fashion house, or you have a factory who will take you on, because it ain't easy to be in that position. It's very, very different. The designers, I've known designers that have had to go to Shepherd's Bush Market and literally buy whole rolls of fabric thinking, oh God, I hope no one will realise where I got this from. But when you are in that sudden privileged position where you're ready, you don't need to worry about that anymore. You just give some references to somebody and a whole team will go off and come back with all these options for you.
Oh, I mean,
it's very rapid when it does happen, isn't it?
A collection like this cost probably close to $1 million just in the samples that you see. I mean, it's not about, forget the music and the set designs. Not
what set design? What set design? What set design?
Yeah, exactly.
Gary sat here very disappointed.
Well, I don't know, maybe there was something that we didn't see.
It was a mood, a set mood.
Yeah, so, but I mean, the clothes, I remember when I was working with the Gucci group, and I remember the problem with Lee McQueen was that it was always going over budget, and you would think about the incredible things he was creating around. No, it was the clothes, because he was researching in fabrics, having stuff made, and then he didn't like it anymore, and that cost hundreds of thousands. So for someone young to be, you know, confronted to this for a while and see the possibilities that you have if you are creative, then I do believe in people having little money and managing to do amazing things with little money, because that's a good school. But they also need to see the possibilities out there. So, and I believe in training. I don't believe, you know, I know a little bit about fashion, I'm quite creative. I'm not a designer, and I would design a horrible collection. Yeah. You cannot be a designer if you're not, right?
Yeah. Amber, you're friends with Fred Butler, who we've had on the panel here, and I imagine quite a few London designers. Do you see them struggling? Do you see the challenges that they're faced with as designers in London?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think all the creative industries struggle. I mean, are struggling especially at the moment in the face of, you know, Arts Council cuts, etc., etc. The creative industries are really feeling it. But I think that's where initiatives like New Gen and Fashion Fringe are really important. People like Colin McDowell have been quite hugely influential in terms of giving London Fashion Week that kickstart to make it now fashionable.
And we should mention at this point Lulu Kennedy and Fashion East.
Yes, yeah,
just been incredible who they've spawned.
Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of financial backing that I think it's traditionally it's harder to get that in London than it is in some of the cities like Paris or Milan that have that sort of infrastructure of manufacturing and the kind of craft techniques there already that kind of fled London a long time ago, and I think it's slowly coming back to London. But I think those kind of initiatives are really essential for keeping young London fashion designers working, basically.
I think one of the things that I've noticed with a lot of young designers is that we were talking about those last minute fabulous creative projects that we just really want to do all the time, is the whole issue of favours. We all live and survive on those. I mean, you've done me quite a few favours in the past, Gary.
Oh, likewise,
and I think that is part of London culture, isn't it? Those designers really do depend on each other. I remember the night before her show, Carrie from Cassette Player, her sewing machine had broken, and I think someone else, I can't remember who it was, literally brought a sewing machine round to her house and actually paid for the car to bring it round. And you do hear these lovely tales of support. There was, I think, a year ago, Sibling, again, amazing expertise in knit, and one of the London Fashion Week designers was having a terrible time with this production and asked them if they could help. And they didn't have time, but they still said yes. You know, I mean, it is, I think things like that, the kind of earnestness of the support that the designers give each other really almost like makes them feel that they're not alone.
Community spirit.
That's very true, and that's very beautiful, but I also think that there is so much talent in London that it is wasted if people will never have the possibility to emerge. And not everybody is Lee McQueen. I mean, Lee McQueen emerged not because he was lucky, but because he was so good. And so I would like that incredible talent that is here to be able to work alongside older designers to make it relevant for the young generation, and then take over, because it's better for them to take over a brand that already existed, we were talking about that, than to disappear because of lack of money.
I think when you look at a lot of these big designers, they have worked for other designers that we regard. And I would always encourage someone to go and work for at
Nicolas
least two.
Ghesquière grew up in the shadow of Gaultier.
Even if
It's
they're
not
not.
a shame.
And you know what? At the time when they were shadowing them, the designer they were shadowing probably wasn't even that well known. But it's just the most wonderful experience, and also to witness techniques that designer uses that they might think, oh, I'm not really keen on that, I don't think you should do that, and realising their own confidence inside. So when I hear of designers that say, oh, I want to be a fashion designer, oh, let's do a show, it's almost like sometimes the easy option, even though it's going to be a terrible struggle and really hard.
And nobody will see it and nobody will consider it, whilst if you work with a star, you are confronted to things to possibilities.
Well, as we're at SHOWstudio, I thought it'd be a good point to maybe consider this. When you're a young designer and you're trying to have a voice from really early on, do you need to start a label? Or are these incredible creative projects that present themselves now helping you channel that and helping you have a voice? And you don't just need to be a fashion designer, but I know you've done a lot of creative projects, Gary, as well. And again, you know, someone like Mark Jacobs bringing in you, where you create something that can be seen online. I know that Nowness does a great job of breaking new films. SHOWstudio is continually breaking boundaries of what can be done in front of the camera and how it is filmed to a global audience. So does a designer really need to enter the system in the way they traditionally have?
No. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think there's any rules.
What you just said shows it, yes.
I mean, yeah, it's odd really from my point of view, because I didn't really have an agenda, just kind of it accidentally.
But I don't think Fret did, and I don't think people like Bethan Wood did. All these kids in London who are so creative, your whole generation, I mean everyone, Matthew Stone, Gareth, they're all doing incredible things. They're all channeling that creative in the most...
I think the internet has really changed things in that respect, hasn't it? And I mean from a fashion media perspective as well, obviously with blogging, and there was was it the Susie Menkes article recently?
Yes.
Sort of criticising the sort of circus that goes on outside
and do
the
you
shows.
want to share with them Susie Bubble's retort to that, because I think that was just as interesting.
Well, her and is it Leander at Man Repeller both kind of wrote retorts to this, and I thought in the Man Repeller piece there was this really interesting line that she said, which was it was something along the lines of, you know, there are no jobs, so we created our own. And I think that actually really nicely summarises this generation of people who kind of are involved in various different creative areas, and the internet is a huge enabler for that.
Am I right in understanding that Susie Menkes had a gripe that these prolific, successful bloggers don't really know the rudiments of the industry?
Hold on, Susie Menkes wasn't against the bloggers. Susie Menkes was saying that unfortunately this street fashion that was so natural and spontaneous, now it's becoming a farce, because people who have nothing to do with the fashion industry dress up. They spend 6 months deciding what to wear, to stand in front of Somerset House or whatever venue and hope to be photographed. So then she said, now bloggers photograph each other. Yes.
And she's quite right, because on the first day of London Fashion Week,
I mean, they stand there just to be photographed.
Yeah. I mean, really, they weren't people from the industry, and they actually looked like people who had saved up to come to London to be there on that day just to be seen outside the tent.
At very worst, it's funny. I don't think. I think
but it's not real anymore. It's not. It's not, because if you want to portray street fashion has to be natural. And one place in the world where this is interesting is London. Okay, where people are different, they dare to dare. They don't. I mean, in Italy, everybody dresses the same. They all follow each other. While here, people are so natural. And if it becomes a way to become famous in the wrong way, then it's not spontaneous anymore. And that's where Susie was. Right?
Yeah, and and a lot of it is monetized now as well, the kind of street style thing, which people don't tend to realise, because it's such a grey area in terms of, you know, people being paid to wear a certain thing or being gifted a certain thing, and there's no real way of letting people know that that's actually an advertising transaction that's gone on.
And do you know what the irony is? The irony is that Susie is one of the very few people in the industry who is not allowed to accept gifts.
Yeah, her and the FT and the New York Times. All the American and Herald Tribune belongs to the New York Times, so it's against the rules. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think at that point, thanks very much.
Thank you.
And it was really great to be able to discuss Dolce & Gabbana, because that was a beautiful show. I think we're all in agreement about that. Thank you very much.